Good day everybody, my name is Daniel and I'm going to be your instructor for today's video. In the previous lesson, what we went through is understanding of arrays, really at a beginner's perspective. In today's video, what we're going to be going through is passing those very same arrays to functions as parameters. So let's get into it. Okay. Alright, there we go. So everything works. So first things first, click on file, create a new project and follow along. So first things first, I'm gonna start off by declaring the actual array and basically what we went through in the previous video. So it's int and you can say r and you can say 1. Okay, let's say array 1, maybe it has values of 3. This is how you declare your array, right? So what I want to get at right now is using a constant variable and passing it as the size instead of having a size that we write over here. Okay, so we write constant, we're gonna write the type of the variable, and then you're gonna write the variable which is size, and I'm gonna initialize it to 3. Okay, I'll explain why we're using a constant global variable here in a second. So we're gonna have size, right? Let's just change this. Instead of array 1, let's just visualize that we're storing values for students, right? Maybe the students need to insert their marks for maybe they're taking 3 subjects or 3 modules at a university or high school. Okay, so I'm gonna say marks here. Okay, so it has this of size, and then I'm gonna initialize it immediately to some value. Say in the first subject they got 60, and then they got a 50, and then they got a 99% in the third test. So this is an array. It takes in 3 values because of the size over here that I declared, and then these are the values that I initialized in at the very beginning. Okay, so what we can do now is we can write a function that's going to take in marks and that's going to output our function. Okay, so but before I do that, I think it's important for me to actually explain the size constant first. So really what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a variable that just stores the actual value that is the size of the array. Okay, now for me to declare this variable outside of this main function, I need to have it as a constant. If I remove the constant, you'll see that my computer is going to start complaining and say, hey, this size needs to be having a constant value, so this has to be a constant because it's a variable that's declared outside of the main function, so we don't want it to change all the time, so it has to be a constant. So, and also having it as a global variable, just now we know that it won't change, so even in the function it won't change. Okay, so let's now create the function and just understand how we pass in these arrays as parameters. So I'm going to create an output function. So first I'm going to do void, I'm going to say output, right, and then I'm going to made a mistake over here. So it's basically output, and it's going to take in an array which is int marks, and I'm going to insert those braces over there. Congratulations, you've just passed in a array into a function as a parameter. Okay, so we just want to print out the values inside of this marks array, and how you're going to do that is you're going to say for, and I'm going to say int I is equals to 0, I smaller than the size, since that's the size of the array, and then I'm going to increment the array. Now we're going to print out the values of the array. I'm going to say cout, I'm going to say marks, and I'm going to say I, and I'm going to say end line. I just want to write down this the values are end line. Okay, there we go. So how we call this function is we're going to do this. We're going to say output, okay, and we're going to pass in marks like that. So now it's time for me to actually explain. Okay, Oh, I can't type today. Okay, so in explanation, right, what's going on here? So first we started off by declaring the array, and then we have a function, and then we pass in this variable, array variable, inside of this output function. So what's happening in this output function? It takes in the array as a parameter, and then obviously there's an out statement, and then there's a loop. So inside of this loop, what actually happens is that, remember that the index of an array starts off at 0. So basically 60 is of the index 0, 50 is of the index 1, and 99 will be of the index 2. So that's why we start this array at 0, okay? And then when we see out marks, which is marks I, the index being I, we're basically saying, hey, listen, print out this thing 3 times. The first one, print out marks 0, which would be 60, print out marks 1, and then print out marks 2. So 60, 50, and 99 will be outputted to the screen. And if you don't believe me, let's run this program and find out ourselves. So there we go. It says the values are 60, 50, and 99. Okay. So what I want to do now, since now we get how we can declare values into, variables into an array and pass it as a parameter to the output function. Now I want to, instead of initializing these values here initially, I want to have the user insert these values by themselves. So I want to create an input function. Okay, so how am I going to do that? So I'm just going to, underneath this constant, I'm going to say input function. I'm going to say void input, and then I'm gonna pass in am I gonna pass in the function, sorry, the array that we're gonna populate, okay, so which is marks. So I'm gonna say int marks, and by the way, marks doesn't actually have to have the same name as marks down here, okay. This is just we're just writing this because we're dealing with the marks array, so just for readability purposes I could change this to any name. Okay, so long as we're passing the actual marks, it should work. It will work actually. So the input, we're taking in marks, and we're going to basically do the same thing. I'm going to copy a lot of this code over here, and I'm going to say insert values. Okay, and I'm going to loop, and then for size I'm going to I'm going to say marks I, and that should be it. So input should take in 3 input values, and then output should output them. So I'm gonna call the function input, I'm gonna pass in marks, and then instead of initializing these values over here, I'm just gonna call input marks and then output marks. So input should be able to now take in the values, and then after that, calling the output function, output should be able to output the values. Okay, so let's try that out and see if it actually works. It says insert values. I'm going to say 50, I'm going to say 50, and I'm going to say 70, and then if I enter, it says the values are 50, 50, and 70 over there. Great, so that works. Okay, so now with arrays, if you think about it, right, if I had these functions here that take in marks and that we use the constant size, right, up top here, and by the way, this is the example from your textbook. If you are enrolled COS1511, this is the example identical to your text, not your textbook but your study guide. Okay, if you are not from UNISA, then no need to worry. It's not like we're explaining anything that is particularly exclusive to UNISA students. This is C++ at the end of the day. Okay, so now, but we want to change something, because if you think about it, if you have this sort of format and you wanted to create more functions, you would be forced to keep using the size parameter. So to stop using size, you would have to create more and more constant integer values over here, right? And you would now use those values inside of your other functions as the actual size of your array, and you don't want to do that, right? So to make this program more dynamic, I'm going to get rid of the size value, okay, and I'm going to pass in the actual size that we want, which is 3 for instance, and then we're gonna make these functions take in an extra parameter. So since we don't know the size of these arrays, we're always going to pass in the actual size as a second parameter to these functions, okay. So I'm going to pass in int size over here, okay, and then I'm going to replace the size with this one, which is the actual one that were passed in as a parameter. Similarly, in the output, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to pass in size over there, and then obviously in your main function now you need to actually pass in the actual size. So I'm going to pass in size 3 since we do know the size of our array. So that's basically it, okay. So just to make this program a little bit more welcoming, I'm going to say insert, I'm going to change this line entirely and say cout, I'm going to say please insert, and I'm going to say size, insert size values. And basically what that does is that it's going to say please insert 3 values if size is 3, and in this case it is 3, okay, and that should work. Let's run this. Insert 3 values. I'm going to say 40, I'm going to pass in 60, and I'm going to pass in 89 and enter, and then it says your values are 40, 60 and 89. So that's very simple. That's very easy to understand. I hope you guys do get it. Now I just want to explain a few things here as well. So there's something that we can do to increase the safety of this program. You see in the output, right, we have marks. So the output has nothing, has no business changing any values in marks. All it has to do is just take in the marks and then output it to the screen. So what you want to do is that you want to make this a constant, like that. So if you make it a constant, if anywhere in your code, maybe by mistake, you change a value of marks, for instance, if I say marks, and then I pass in, okay, maybe the last value of marks, and then I pass in maybe 400, for instance, this function shouldn't allow that, because its primary purpose is to actually just output the values of marks, not to change anything in marks. So this, having a const here, will make it impossible for that to happen. So it acts as a safety measure. Okay, so it says expression must be a modifiable value, so it'll stop you from actually making this mistake. Okay, so const is very good here. And also with my research, I researched and I tried to check, can you actually pass in marks as a reference parameter? The answer is yes, you can. However, by default, arrays are passed into functions by reference. So you don't need to actually add an ampersand over here. And what's actually going to happen is that you're going to get an error if you try to do that. So if you actually wanted to enforce passing it by reference, you would have to wrap this up into braces like this, and that would work. I don't know why it's saying this right now, but yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah, just a little syntax error there. So this would work, but really, because these values are already passed in by reference, you don't need to do that at all. So guys, this is an example of passing arrays as passing arrays by reference to function. Sorry, passing arrays to functions as a parameter, and like I said, they're already passed in by reference, so you don't need to worry about that. So with that being said, guys, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.